In the 1980s and 1990s, an interesting cycle of inspirational teacher movies were being made. You know the type, the movie where a big star plays a down-and-out teacher who gets posted to some crime-ridden school, and they manage to turn things around. Often they were based on true stories like Stand and Deliver, Dangerous Minds, Lean on Me, and a few others. Then there were the more fanciful, tough guy teacher movies like Nick Nolte's Teachers and James Belushi's underrated The Principal. But of all these movies, my personal favorite is The Substitute, starring Tom Berenger, and it is a kick-ass action romp from the 90s that not enough people have seen.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
In it, he plays a mercenary who goes undercover as a substitute teacher in order to avenge a brutal assault on his girlfriend, a crusading teacher played by Heat's Diane Venora. While initially only planning on staying long enough to hopefully maim the teens responsible, he finds himself oddly drawn to his new profession, realizing that a lot of his students are actually pretty good kids, and that there's a massive drug operation going down at the school that he's gonna burn down, all in the name of giving these kids a future. While somewhat obscure nowadays, it was an unexpected box office hit in 1996 and did so well on home video that it spawned 3 sequels, none of which Berenger returned for. Now, Tom Berenger is a very interesting case of a guy who was very popular in the 80s but never quite made it onto the A-list. Throughout the decade, he was a huge rising star thanks to key roles in 2 of the most influential films of the decade, The Big Chill and Platoon. If you take a look at those 2 movies, you get an interesting glimpse at the kind of range he had. In The Big Chill, he played a TV heartthrob in the Tom Selleck mode, albeit one who finds it tough to live up to the slick hero he plays on TV and is suffering through a very early midlife crisis. Isn't it weird that in the quintessential 1980s midlife crisis movies, everybody in the cast seems to be 35 or under? By that math, I think I was due for a midlife crisis about 7 years ago. In Platoon, he plays the battle-scarred Sergeant Barnes, who's locked into kind of a quasi-spiritual combat with Willem Dafoe's Sergeant Alias for the proverbial souls of his soldiers, with him a nightmarish villain. Sadly, Berenger's follow-up parts, minus a significant cameo in Oliver Stone's Born on the 4th of July, never quite pushed him onto the A-list, with him doing very solid work in films like Ridley Scott's Someone to Watch Over Me, Costa Gravis' Betrayed, and many more. Yet in the mid-90s, perhaps playing on the notoriety of his role in Platoon, he began to carve out a bit of a mini niche in action films, often playing characters that weren't that different from the ones he played in Oliver Stone's Platoon, albeit with a much more heroic nature. Probably the best of the bunch was Sniper, which is, I would say, the best movie I never saw that got 9 sequels. That's right, folks, there are 9 Sniper movies, and you know what? Tom Berenger is in a lot of them. In fact, I think he's still making them. If Berenger had come along at a different era for action movies, he would have likely been a bigger star with his more down-to-earth older heroes, not all that different from the kinds of movies guys like Gerard Butler and Liam Neeson are making nowadays. But in the 90s, muscle-bound heroes and martial artists were all the rage. That's too bad because Berenger really rocks in The Substitute, which makes him work in the roles that he has the kind of look where you believe him as a world-weary mercenary, but also as a teacher. He kind of effortlessly fits into both roles. If the movie had been made with Steven Seagal or Jean-Claude Van Damme, you would have probably never bought the character as a teacher. What's really cool about this movie is you see how his character Shale finds his priorities shifting as the film goes on. At the beginning, he's a worn-out mercenary who's just been disavowed by the government with his whole team, who are a who's who of 90s badasses. You got Luis Guzman, you got Raymond Cruz before he did Breaking Bad, you got Richard Brooks who was on Law and Order, and you even have the great William Forsythe. The gang is somewhat fractured as they're being enticed to enter the drug trade as mercenaries for drug dealers, but Shale's code of honor prevents them from going down this direction. Basically, he's frustrated with a world that's been overrun by hoodlums, and when his girlfriend is kneecapped, it just pushes him over the edge. The movie kind of toys with going in a more Taxi Driver style direction, with Shale's introduction to his students being quite violent, with him sneering with hatred as he writes on the blackboard. You feel like he's gonna snap, but as the movie goes on, Shale finds that he starts to enjoy being a teacher, especially when he realizes how many of the students he teaches are thugs because, as the old song says, it chose them rather than vice versa. He realizes that many of them have children of their own that they don't want to see go down the same road, with Shale telling them that's how he sees them, as children, and he doesn't want them to get hurt either. Basically, Berenger makes Shale's moral stance as the film goes on a lot more realistic and three-dimensional. Yet The Substitute also doesn't let down action fans. It's directed by Robert Mendel, who also directed a Best Movie You Never Saw favorite here at JoBlo, FX. Even though it's clearly a low-budget film which was financed by a company called Live Entertainment, which mostly dealt in straight-to-video fare in this era, he manages to pepper the movie with a couple of cool low-key action sequences. While not a trained martial artist, Berenger's fight scenes in the film look realistic, like the kind of fighting a mercenary would actually do, without any posing. The movie also has some great villains. Mark Anthony, long before he became better known as a pop star, plays the student drug-dealing kingpin, head of a gang called the KOD. While initially he seems like Shale's major target, he ends up becoming just kind of the B-villain when you find out that he's working for the school's principal, played by Ernie Hudson, who has a deal with the Florida cartel to use his school as a warehouse for cocaine, and a guaranteed client base as well. Now, Hudson is downright satanic as the educator gone awry, with him sneering as an idealistic teacher played by Glenn Plummer tries to help him see the error of his ways. It doesn't go too well for him. Yet you also see that he's got a family he's supporting, giving him a bit of three-dimensionality. The movie culminates in a massive action battle royale where Shale and his mercenary pals go to war with the bad guys who've hired their own mercenary army. It does go a little bit overboard towards the end with the amount of cocaine the school seems to be warehousing. Probably in like the hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, the walls are literally coming apart with cocaine, and in fact, Berenger and Hudson start throwing it at each other during the fight at the end of the movie. It kind of rules though. It eventually picked up a cult following, with the soundtrack being popular and the movie's eventual VHS release being a smash. Fun fact, I actually worked at a video store a couple of years after this movie came out, and it was one of those movies we could just never keep in stock because it was popular with teens and they just wouldn't return the video cassette, which was a pretty common thing. It spawned a franchise which happened to be just a shade too early to ever get Berenger on board to reprise his role. In the 3 sequels, the late Treat Williams, an actor very much in the Tom Berenger mold, took on the part, although he wasn't actually playing Shale, he was just playing another mercenary who also happened to be masquerading as a teacher. And oddly, even after Berenger's sniper movies became DTV staples, they never tried to reignite the franchise with him. It remains a pretty popular catalog title for Lionsgate, who have the movie streaming on Netflix. While no one will say that The Substitute is a top-tier action movie of the 90s, as far as B-grade actioners of the era go, for me it's pretty close to the top of the heap, alongside some of JCVD's best movies or those early Steven Seagal flicks. If you haven't seen it, make sure to put it on your Netflix watch list. It's a blast.